Hello, and welcome to Candidates Up Front. This is the public interest election program of Berks Community Television and the League of Women Voters of Berks County. I'm Judith Cranus, a member of the League. Our November 5th general election is coming up, and we will be voting for both state officials and federal officials. The deadline to register is Monday, October 21st. The League is interviewing candidates in contested races, those who wanted to be interviewed. And for each race, the candidates will get the same basic questions and will have the same amount of time to answer them.
Hello, I'm Renee Dietrich, a member of the League of Women Voters. We're having candidates for the 6th Congressional District. Two candidates are competing for the district, Democrat Chrissy Houlihan and Republican Neil Young. The district is in the southern section of Berks County, stretching from Carnarvon through Exeter, the city of Reading, Wyomissing, and Spring Township, and south to New Morgan. It also includes part of Chester County. The U.S. House of Representatives proposes and passes federal laws, which must also be approved by the Senate. They act on domestic and international issues. They serve 2-year terms and earn $174,000 a year, plus benefits and expenses. Please note that the opinions expressed in this interview are those of the candidate. They are not the opinions of the League of Women Voters or Berks Community Television. This interview is with Chrissy Houlihan, and she is the incumbent. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
Ms. Houlihan, let's start out. Tell the viewers about yourself and why you are running. 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Chrissy Houlihan. I'm currently serving in my 3rd term as your representative down in Washington, D.C. It's a privilege to be able to have that unique opportunity. By way of background, before joining Congress, I am a veteran. I served in the United States Air Force. I am an engineer by education. I'm an entrepreneur, having grown several companies within our community, within Chester and Berks County, that have become national and global entities. And I've also been an educator. I taught high school chemistry in North Philadelphia and also ran a nonprofit that focuses on early childhood literacy. In Congress, I serve on the Armed Services Committee as well as the Intelligence Committee, and I am very privileged to be able to work here in our community to make sure that you are represented on all things federal.
Thank you. What do you think are the 2 most compelling issues on which, if elected, you feel you can make a difference?
So I ran for Congress almost 8 years ago for the very first time, having never run for any office before, because I'm was deeply concerned about a number of things in our nation. I believe we're divided right now, and I'm worried about that. And so one of the things that I think is most crucial and most compelling that I hope that I do now and that I will continue to do into the future, if reelected, is to be able to make sure I'm taking care of the constituents that live here in our community. More than 700,000 of us comprise this district. And what does that look like? That looks like constituent services, making sure that any intersection that you have with the federal government, Veterans Affairs, immigration, passports, the post office, that you are getting the aid and the help that you need. And we are an award-winning office for constituent services, making sure that we are a responsible steward of your money and your taxes. We have returned now more than $50 million of taxpayer money and issues that people have had within our community over the last 5 years, and I hope to continue to do that as well. Getting to the civility and decency and the fact that I worry very much about how divided our nation is right now, we also in our office work very, very hard to try to restore trust in our government and try to restore trust in each other. And the way that we do that is by being very transparent. We've won awards, congressional awards for that as well, with our community, and also by doing things such as having town halls. We are active. We are the leading office in Pennsylvania for town halls. This will be our 90th next week in Congress. And so those are the ways that I would like to continue to serve us if I'm fortunate enough to be reelected again.
Thank you. Now, what do you see as the 3 most crucial issues facing Congress in the next term?
Sure, and as you introduced the position, this is a position, the Congress, the U.S. Congress, that works side by side with the Senate. We pass legislation, and that legislation, if we're able to agree on it, will then go to the President's desk for signature. And so if I had to kind of pick three major buckets that I think are our responsibility and that we need to do the best that we are able to on, it would be security. Whether it's border security, which I'm certain that we'll talk about, or national security, which is of course related to security, or security in our communities, gun safety as an example. That's one major bucket that I would say. Another one would be the economy. You know, it's our responsibility to work hard to make sure that everyone has a fair shot and everyone is able to survive, not just survive, but thrive in our economies, whether local, state, or national. So I would put that as the second the bucket. And you asked for three. And I would say the third is really to make sure that we do no harm, that we're preserving the freedoms that we all depend on. You know, the right to happiness. And I think that that's really at issue right now in this election. I think that if anything, we're facing a time right now where we are losing our freedoms, and I'm very worried about that. And it's my job to make sure that we're preserving and protecting our democracy.
Let's talk about international relations for a minute. What is your philosophy on the responsibility of the United States in international issues? If the continuum is isolation to involvement, where do you place yourself? If it differs issue to issue, please explain.
Of course. So by way of background, I am the daughter of an immigrant. My dad was born in what was Poland, what is now Ukraine, in the city of Lviv during the war. And my dad and my mom raised me to understand our unique responsibility in this country and in this world to lead, to be the beacon, to be the light on the hill. And so I believe that we have an enormous responsibility globally. On that spectrum, I would put myself in a place where I think we need to participate, not just in terms of defense and our militaries, but also in terms of diplomacy and humanitarian efforts. We also have a responsibility to lead by example in the way that we behave and comport ourselves. And so what does that look like for me in Congress? I serve on the Armed Services Committee. It's my job to make sure that our military is ready. I also serve on the Intelligence Committee. It's a select committee of members of Congress selected by the Speaker of the House as well as the Leader of the House to think about all of the things that you all, frankly, probably don't want to be thinking about making sure that we protect ourselves and are safe and secure. And so I really do find it a huge part of my job to be engaged and involved in our world. And interestingly, I know that I have a little bit more time. It has become more evident to all of us how uniquely tied we are to one another, whether it's through Ukraine or Israel or China and the Indo-Pacific or through COVID. We know we need to be engaged in our world.
So how about give us your specific thoughts on how the U.S. should interact with China and Taiwan, Russia and the Ukraine, and Israel and Gaza?
Sure. And all of these things are deeply connected, right? The world is a huge place, but actually quite small when you talk about all of the interconnectedness of these governments and the wars that are ongoing now in some of those places. I very much believe that we need to continue to be engaged in Ukraine and in support of them defending their democracy. I very much believe that as Ukraine goes, so does a lot of Europe, and so does, frankly, many democracies around the world. I've had the opportunity to meet with President Zelensky and to travel to Ukraine. I continue to be engaged in that area. It also, frankly, relates to what's going on in Gaza and in Israel. You know, my father is a Holocaust survivor. There is a connection, a deep connection between what's happening in Ukraine and the history there and what's happening with Israel. And we need to defend and protect our ally, Israel, to make sure that they can protect their democracy. That's very related to what's happening in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, because President Xi is absolutely watching that. And what we do to protect and defend our allies, how we defend ourselves and how we comport ourselves is going to be an indicator for what he should do or could do in that area. And in my committee assignments, I have the opportunity to visit all of these places. So I've been to Taiwan, I've been to Ukraine, I've been to Israel and to Gaza, and I will continue hopefully to serve us in that way if I'm lucky enough to be reelected.
Thank you. Now, both parties say that they are pro-family, but they propose and vote for different things. What legislation do you feel is pro-family?
It's a really good question, and I think this is actually an opportunity that we have in this Congress right now. Everyone says that they are pro-family. It's how we act on that that's really important, because being pro-family is not just being pro-baby. It's also being pro-child. It's also being pro-woman. It's also being making sure that once we have those children, that they have the economic support, whether it's food security or great education, that we believe that they need to have to be able to be successful. The Democratic Party has done a terrific job over the last several years, particularly on this issue, whether it's passing things like safety and security in guns, which I hope that we'll have the chance to talk about, making sure that we have increased access to good schools and education and safer schools, whether it's things like things that I've personally worked on, which is paid family leave, making sure that we have 12 weeks of paid leave for men and women who serve in uniform or federal employees. We need to continue to work on that and childcare issues, food issues, to make sure that genuinely it's not just about having a child, but it's about making sure that that child survives and thrives and that our economy is able to accommodate for that.
Thank you. What do you think is the place of religion, if there is one, in politics, education, and in government?
I believe very strongly in the separation of church and state. And I believe that there is no place for religion in politics.
Thank you. Now let's talk about registering to vote and get people out to vote. The ease of registering to vote and casting ballots and the power of our vote due to gerrymandering are things that change when we move from state to state. As critical as the vote is to the American concept of democracy, should there be federal standards that protect our vote no matter where we live?
So I think that it is very important that we hold sacrosanct our privilege and our right to vote. And you're right, it is different in different states. Pennsylvania, I would put probably somewhere on the middle to the right of being difficult to vote. And we, I think, need to do a better job of allowing people to be able to vote. Do I think that's the federal government's job? I think in some cases it's partially the federal government's job, but largely I believe it to be the responsibility of the states. Where is it the federal government's job? It is the federal government's job to make sure that non-citizens don't vote. And it already is not legal for non-citizens to vote. It is the federal government's job to make sure that we have regular and respectful transitions of power. Those kinds of things, I believe, are absolutely the federal government's job.
Now, how about the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act? Do you support them? Why or why not?
So I have voted to support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act now twice, and I do believe that there really does need to be the opportunity for that to be reconsidered in the next Congress. I hope that I have the chance to vote on it again. I do hope that the Senate itself also has the opportunity to take that up. Having been fortunate enough to serve with John Lewis, who's a remarkable man, and one of the reasons why I ran for Congress, long story, has to do with his tenacity and his interest in making sure that all people had access to the ballot. I very much believe in support in those pieces of legislation, and I hope that they become law.
Okay, let's talk about gun violence. Gun violence costs the United States billions of dollars annually. That includes outfitting and training first responders against new and improved weapons, retrofitting buildings to add security. 96% of gun violence-related health care is shouldered by Medicare and U.S. employers through health insurance. Gun violence is an inflationary economic pressure. Should Congress act on this issue? And if so, what should the Congress do about gun violence?
So this is a very important question, and getting back to your first question about what should we be doing in Congress, I mentioned security, and we've had a chance to talk about that a couple times. Gun safety, gun security, being safe in our communities and our schools is really, really critical. We are a community in Chester and Berks County where 40% of us are gun owners. It is fairly common that people will own guns, and so as a Democrat, when I was first running for Congress, I was told not to talk about this issue, that this was not an issue that would be very popular with our community. I said at that time, and I will say still, I'm a veteran. I'm a third-generation veteran. I know the responsibility it is to carry and own a gun. I understand that. I'm also an educator. I used to teach high school chemistry in North Philadelphia, where every day me and my students would go through the metal detectors to make sure that none of us was carrying any sort of weaponry. I think it's absolutely my place and my responsibility to talk about making sure that our communities are safe for each other, to each other, for one another. And so what can Congress do? Well, thankfully, last Congress, we were able to pass the first legislation, Safer Communities Act was what it was called, in decades, that actually addressed this issue of gun safety. Was it enough? Probably not. Should we do more? Absolutely. It talked about background checks and red flag laws. It actually strengthened our schools and made sure that there was mental health care in our schools as well. There is much, much more that we need to do, but this is absolutely something that is in the purview of Congress to be responsible to and for the American people.
Thank you. Now, we've been having quite a number of climate-related disasters. Flood insurance, homeowners insurance, health insurance have all increased. Should Congress play a role in addressing that, and if so, what would the role be?
So this is another issue when we talk about security and safety. Our planet's weather is changing, and we as humans are causing that. And we have a responsibility not just to be more resilient to that, but also to make sure that we stop the flow in the process of that. In the meantime, we do have more natural disasters, such as floods. My own daughter lives in the Phoenixville area, and some of her neighborhood was devastated by the Hurricane Ida, and many of the homes have been destroyed as a result of that. And flood insurance and responses to that with FEMA and those sorts of things are the federal government's responsibilities. And we should continue to work on that. In fact, my office is working on the fact that right now that many insurance companies are not required to tell you that you need to renew your flood insurance. And we want to make sure that that's not okay. So I will continue to work on making sure that we as a federal government are looking at protecting citizens, but I will also continue to work on things such as the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a major piece of legislation that I was able to help pass with only Democratic votes, which will able to help make our planet less reliant on fuels and energy sources that will end up hurting our community and our environment rather than helping. So I have both responsibilities.
Let's talk about the homeless. There seem to be more and more homeless people living on the streets. Is this something for Congress to address, or should it be left to the states? And if it comes up to Congress, what needs to be in the program for you to support it?
Housing affordability is a huge issue in our community, and it's particularly acute in the 6th Congressional District. And in fact, after this interview, I'm heading over to a facility that received some federal funding as a result of something called the Community Project Funding grant that I help organize every year. And that particular organization in Reading has received funding to be able to build affordable housing for many of the people in the Reading community. So yes, it's my job to make sure that there is more affordable housing. It is also the state's jobs. It's also the local jobs. And it's also, frankly, our jobs as individual citizens to recognize that this is an issue of urgency, to be supportive of more affordable housing being built in our communities. And that's why it's important that people vote for people in elected offices who would like to see us have more affordable housing. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I would encourage you to, when you're making your choice on whom to vote for me.
Okay. Recently, Congress, which hasn't updated our immigration laws since 1986, negotiated a new plan that people in both parties said was acceptable. But at the last minute, it didn't pass. In your mind, what does an immigration law need to contain for you to vote for it? And then part of that is, should there be a path to citizenship for people who have lived here for many years?
So this is one of our issues of security, and also a big issue for our economic stability is, the pathway to citizenship and making sure that we continue to be the country that my father arrived at as a 5-year-old, and now, one generation later, I'm a member of Congress. We need to make sure that we encourage that and have that ability. This piece of legislation that you're referring to took 4 months to negotiate in the Senate. It was a brutal negotiation, and in the end, they had more than, I believe, 70 votes out of 100 votes in support of this piece of legislation. It didn't just not happen. It didn't happen because the former president decided that this was a issue that he wanted to run on, and so he scuttled the deal. He asked his members not to vote on this deal. Had that piece of legislation come through the Senate, I believe it would have had 70 votes out of 100, and had it come through the House of Representatives, and even if it did today, I believe it would have more than 300 votes out of 435. I would be in support of that piece of legislation. I believe it was hard fought. I believe that there certainly are problems with it that I would not support 100% of, but I believe it addresses security at our southern border and our northern border. I believe it addresses pathways to citizenship. I believe it supports making sure that we have a more robust pathway for more people to come here legally. I believe there's also a piece of legislation in Congress that is bipartisan on the House side that I would be supportive of as well. We need to find durable, lasting, bipartisan solutions to this issue and not play politics with it.
Okay. Would you be willing to allocate adequate funds to clear the backlog in immigration caused by not enough immigration judges and staff?
Absolutely, and indeed that was part of this piece of legislation that was scuttled. It included quite a lot of resources to be able to accelerate the process of getting people through, and also quite a lot of resources for the Border Patrol. In fact, it was endorsed by the Border Patrol.
Okay, well, let's see if that passes this time. Wildfires, storms, and floods are expensive emergencies to deal with. The FEMA ran out of disaster relief during the middle of the hurricane season. In 2024, Congress allocated nearly $200 million for pre-disaster mitigation projects to lessen the impact of emergencies. Should the U.S. spend more on mitigation, including climate change, so we can spend less on disasters and disaster relief?
So absolutely. We need to be, as we've talked about, we know that our planet's weather is changing and that the frequency and severity of these kinds of weather events is increasing. And what you're seeing is in places like Louisiana and places like Florida, and frankly places like here, for the first time ever, Chester County was declared a federal state of emergency because of that hurricane that we talked about. We need to make sure that we are building for resiliency. So what does that look like? The Infrastructure and Jobs Act had a pretty significant piece of funding that was about water and flooding mitigation for exactly this purpose. You know, after the Hurricane Ida came through here, we want to make sure that we're not rebuilding exactly the same way. Some of our community project funding in Downingtown, as an example, allows the police station that was devastated from the flood to not just rebuild itself right where it was, but rather to rebuild itself somewhere where it may be more protected the next time. So we do have a responsibility for that. And frankly, we have a responsibility as a government to be able to fund things and fund them on time. And that's one of the things that we're struggling with the most right now. We are right now kind of continuing resolution after continuing resolution, not able to fund the government properly, and as a consequence, that hurts our national security. That hurts our ability to build our communities. So we have a real responsibility to govern, and right now the party that's in the majority, who are the Republicans, are not governing.
Okay. I want to ask you a question about the Equal Rights Amendment. I have been working on that for more than 50 years, and my thing is I hope it passes before I die. So I want to ask you this question. Do you believe that, as the amendment states, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex? Do you think that that belongs in the U.S. Constitution? And should that amendment from '73 be published as an amendment now?
So it's really not funny, but actually kind of tragic that this is a question. My mother was a participant in the League of Women Voters most of my childhood. My mom was a Navy wife, and everywhere we moved, she would work with the various leagues in her area. And one of the biggest things she worked on was the ERA. My mom is now 78, and it has not yet passed. And it is a tragedy. And so, absolutely, I am in support of this amendment and it being part of the Constitution. Unfortunately, I think it's pretty hard to get anything into the Constitution these days. So I'm not hopeful, but I will continue to work on it.
Thank you. We're coming toward the end of our program here, so I want to ask you, two major parties have different views on economic impact of tariffs and taxes. What is your view? How do tariffs affect the economy? Does it matter where the product's from? What are your thoughts on this?
So my background is, as I mentioned, as an engineer, and my particular kind of engineering is something called industrial engineering or systems engineering. And so my education and my career has been in supply chains and in manufacturing. And so I have a particular view on this. I believe that things like tariffs are punitive largely to the consumer. I believe that it does matter where your product comes from. And I do believe that we need to increasingly divest ourselves from countries that don't have our best interest in mind, and that would be China, amongst others. I do believe it's important that we have supply chains that are with countries that have similar values to ours. And those are the kinds of things that I work with in Congress. Specifically, I worked on a task force, a defense task force about our supply chains for our Defense Department to make sure that we weren't vulnerable, as we were and are still because of COVID and because of the threats in the Indo-Pacific, and made some recommendations on not just kind of munitions and that sort of thing when you think about supply chains, but things like pharmaceutical ingredients. We are enormously vulnerable in that area. And so I do think that we need to be very, very thoughtful about, how we're thinking about the global economy and our place in it.
We have time for you to make a 1-minute closing statement. So whatever you'd like to conclude.
First of all, thank you for having me. I think this is a really nice rhythm to the cycle of running for Congress and seeking this office, and I'm grateful for the chance to talk to you again. I'm deeply admiring of your organization and the purpose that it serves. I hope very much that this conversation has demonstrated to you the eagerness that I have to continue to serve our community in the ways that I have in the last 5 or so years. I hope that what you've heard is a voice of someone who's deeply committed to pragmatism and to practical solutions and to working across the aisle to make sure that we have a government that you can be proud of and a nation that shines as we should as that beacon of hope in the world. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Houlihan, for sharing your views with us. Viewers, please remember that there's another candidate for the 6th Congressional District, Neil Young. And you can see that interview on BCTV's website or the YouTube page. To check your own voting status, go to votepa.gov. You can register, change your party, locate your polling place, or apply for an absentee or mail-in ballot. The deadline to register is October 21, and the deadline to apply for a mail-in ballot is October 29. Then, check the League's online voters guide, vote411.org, and confirm your own voting district and get more information about the candidates. Or contact Berks County Election Services, 610-478-6490. Thank you for watching Candidates Up Front. I'm Renee Dietrich, and I hope you have a good day.